Who gets remembered in a story? The one we talk about or the ones we don't? Because over time, the focus shifts. It doesn't happen all at once. It's quiet, gradual, a detail here, a headline there. A version that gets told again and again until it becomes the version we know. And the more we hear it, the more it settles in. The shape of the story changes. What sits at the centre moves. What feels important isn't always what it started out as. And the people who should be there, the ones whose lives shape what actually happened, start to fall away to the edges. Not because they mattered less, but because they were quieter. Because their stories didn't grow in the same way. And before long, you can know a story really well without ever knowing the people inside of it. Welcome to If These Trees Could Talk.
Before we go any further, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the land this story sits on and the land from where we are speaking from. This story unfolds on the lands of the Wiradjuri people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to the families and community who have lived this story and continue to carry it. We also acknowledge the land we are recording on today, the lands of the Wonnarua people, and pay our respects and offer thanks for the care of both country and community that has taken place here. We want to gently acknowledge as well that today's episode contains the names of people who have passed, including members of Aboriginal communities. We share this with care. Because this isn't just a story that exists in time, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, stories are not separate from the land they belong to. They are held within it, passed through it, carried across generations. And when something happens on country, it doesn't just sit in the past. It's felt, it's remembered, it's carried by all who belong to it. So as we move through this story, we do so with respect for the land, for the people, and for the lives that are part of it.
He was wanted. Families left trying to understand something that will never make sense. And that's the moment that everything shifts to the wrong story. He surrenders. And he says, "Thank God it's over." This is not your story. Before you start listening today, I just want to let you know that this is not one for you to have on around the kiddos. There are themes today that discuss murder and sexual assault. There's also some really tough stuff in here that we go through, tough for us to research, tough for you guys to listen to. And I want to acknowledge that there are still living relatives. This is a story that is not too far behind us in our history. And so I want to take this opportunity in case one of the family members happens to stumble across this or someone who lived in this community. We share this with the greatest respect for your experiences, the grief that you still hold, and the amazing women that you lost. Hey, Megan.
Hey.
I know you're into experiments.
One.
Can I try something with you?
Sure.
I'm going to say a few names and I want you to tell me if you recognise them.
Sure.
Kristy Scholes.
No.
Lateesha Nolan.
No.
What about Malcolm Naden?
Yeah. I see where you're going here.
What do you know about him?
That he killed some people and then spent some time hiding in the mountains not far away?
That's pretty much what most people know. So I don't want you to feel bad about not knowing those first two names, because I think if I asked anyone in this country that same question, they would have the same response as you just did.
Why do we not know the victims but we know the perpetrator?
It's because of how this story was told. It became all about the man who disappeared into the bush and the sightings and the manhunt and the police. There were even pubs naming burgers after him. When you listen to most interviews about this case, and there are a lot of them, and I understand this, but it doesn't mean that I agree with it. When you hear police who are involved in the manhunt and in capturing Malcolm, you would almost think that the most significant thing this man did was shoot a police officer. But those first two names I mentioned, they should be the only reason that we know the last one. And that's why I'm going to tell the story today in the format that I'm going to do it. And you may need a rewind sound effect because we're going to start from the end and move our way back to the beginning. I'm not doing it to build suspense. I'm doing it to remove it, because this was never a story about a man who disappeared into the bush. It was always a story about the people he left behind. And we normally start an episode by talking about a place. And first of all, we're going to go to Sydney, the Supreme Court of New South Wales. And I'm going to suggest that you guys buckle in, because we're going to fly a lot around New South Wales today. I will keep you up to date, but we're going to be in and out of quite a few different spots. So I'm not going to do a whole thing about Sydney. Everybody knows where that is, but that's where we're starting today's story.
Should I do a virtual tour of this?
You could,
I
yes.
haven't done one in a long time.
Yes, you should.
Okay.
In 2013, in that courtroom in Sydney, Malcolm Naden is standing there being sentenced, and by that point, the version of the story most people remember is already over. The manhunt is done. He's been caught. The headlines have moved on. There's no urgency left in that room. There was no arguing or trying to prove innocence. Malcolm pleaded guilty, and that room was quiet. Just a judge, a courtroom, and a man who for years had been somewhere else entirely. Out there. The sentence comes down, life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. It's not dramatic and it's not drawn out. The only rise is the applause from the public gallery when the sentence is delivered. Today he's still in custody in a maximum security prison here in New South Wales. And that's where this story ends for him. There'll be no release, no return to life outside of those walls, no version of this where he steps back into the world. And when you sit with that for a moment, when you really strip back everything to just that courtroom and that sentence, the story starts to feel a little bit different, because all of the things we tend to associate with this case, the bush, the sightings, the years on the run, they were never in that room. They didn't exist there. What existed there was what was done by him to others. And if we're starting here, at the end, the only place left to go is backwards. We're just going to take a tiny step back this time, not far, just enough to shift the angle a little. Because before that courtroom in Sydney, before the sentence and all of the finality that comes with it, there's another moment sitting underneath that. After his arrest, when he was in custody at Goulburn Correctional Centre, and for the first time in years, he is not moving. He's not out in the bush. He's not slipping between places. He's not being searched for. He is contained and still. and police are trying to understand what happened. But from what's been shared by investigators, when they first try to speak with him about it, he doesn't start talking. There's no immediate outpouring, no moment where everything comes rushing out. Instead, he tells them he needs time to get his thoughts in order. And I remember hearing that and just sitting with it for a second, because there's something that feels very deliberate. It's not panic, it's not confusion, it's not someone overwhelmed by what's happened. It's controlled. So the police give him that space, and eventually, instead of speaking, he writes. What comes back is a handwritten confession, 25 pages of it. Structured, detailed, articulate, considered, and most notably, it's written without remorse. Not just in terms of what he says he did, but in the way it's laid out, the clarity of it, the level of detail. And that's the part that's hard to sit with, because it's not chaotic or scattered. It's not someone trying to piece together the events after the fact. It's deliberate. And within that, from what's been described, there are not just accounts of the acts themselves, but glimpses into what he says he was thinking in those moments. And I think instinctively you expect that if you get that close to it, if you're reading something written in his own hand, there'll be something there that helps to make sense. Some kind of insight, some kind of explanation, something that lets you understand it in a way you wouldn't have before. But even then, that doesn't really happen. It doesn't make it make sense. It doesn't soften it or shift it into something you can wrap your head around. It just confirms what was already known. The confession itself was never released publicly, and that's deliberate because of how graphic it is and out of respect for the victims and their families. So most of us will never read it. We'll never see it in full. But years later, journalist Dimity Clancy was given access to it. And the way she describes it lines up with everything else. It's not emotional. It's not reflective. It's not someone trying to justify or explain. It's just matter of fact. Like a record. Dimity was a reporter during the case, often on scene during the manhunt, and she had built a relationship with the victims' families. So she needed to check in before she did anything with these 25 pages that Australia wanted to know the contents of. The family's response? You know what? If you tell that story, maybe everybody will know what a bad person he is. And that, to me, that is more important than anything that confession contained. Because the truth is, everything that actually mattered, all of the harm, was already there, regardless of his words. And I think the moment where the story really shifts, not in the bush, not in the search, but here, in a cell in Goulburn, with time to get his thoughts in order and 25 pages of words that doesn't heal any of the harm that was already done.
So you've started this episode by saying that what we've read was all about him and not the victims, yet it sounds like this one reporter, Dimity
Clancy,
has taken the time to see from the perspective of the families of the girls. Did she report in a different way to the rest of the media?
They did the Malcolm Naden confessions, which was, I think it's about a 25-minute, a current affair special. She actually won a Walkley Award for how she put this together. And it's a fascinating story on how she was able to take his words and do it in a way that I think gave people a little bit of insight, but also protected the victims at the same time. I think she did a very thoughtful job of putting that together. And I've heard her interviewed afterwards, and she talks about going back to Joan, who is Lateesha's mum, and talking to her about it, and those were Joan's words. She wanted people to understand just how bad he was.
Maybe we shouldn't be naming burgers after him like he's a hero.
No, I don't think we should. And we have talked about this before in the Captain Moonlight episode about Australia's propensity to canonise these characters. After I finished writing this yesterday, I got on YouTube and I just went back and watched a whole chunk of media reports at the time because I was writing this based off my own memory. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. And I wasn't. There were people who reported at the time, I think, with the correct amount of respect for the people who should have been at the centre of the story. But in a lot of those stories, the girls' names are mentioned as a lead-in to the story that they actually want to tell.
Was the detail known back then?
I think they knew, and you'll see that they knew as we rewind a little bit further. We're going to take another step back now from Goulburn, from the confession, from that contained stillness of a cell, back out into the bush. And before we even get to the arrest itself, it's worth sitting with the place for a second, because this part of New South Wales, the Upper Hunter, out towards Barrington Tops, near a little place called Mopey, is not somewhere you just pass through. It's remote. And I know because I've stayed out there at Rawdon Vale, which is right near Mopey.
I remember receiving photos from here.
Yes. And I might have felt a little bit different as I appreciated the stillness and the serenity of this gorgeous place if I had realised that the little old Airbnb that we were staying in might have very well been one of the places that Naden was breaking into to raid for food. The guest house that we stayed in, when you sit on the front veranda, you look down on the Kerripit River, and the road that runs along that river is the same road that the hut is on. Like
Right
we
there.
were in walking distance. Yeah. Out here it's thick bushland, winding tracks, properties spaced far enough apart that you can feel the distance between them. The kind of landscape where you can stand still and hear nothing but wind through the trees, a distant cow, and if there is a car, you're going to know it's coming. You're a long way from anywhere, and that remoteness matters because it's part of how this story was able to unfold the way it did. By March 2012, police had been looking for Malcolm Naden for almost 7 years. And by that point, he wasn't just Australia's most wanted man, he was wanted. There was a weight behind it, something that had been building over time because for police this wasn't just about the murders or the assaults or even the fact that he'd managed to disappear into terrain like this for so long. It had shifted back in December 2011 near Nowan during an operation. He shot a police officer, and that changes things for those chasing him.
Did the police officer die?
No, he didn't. He was shot through the shoulder, but he survived. When something like that happens, it changes how a search feels for the people who are out there searching when he's got one of their own. And it changes how far they're willing to go to bring the whole thing to an end. And we'll come back to that because this part matters. By then, the investigation had been formalised under Strike Force Durkin, and they had come close. More than once, sightings that didn't quite land, moments where he was nearby and then gone again. That sense that he was just out of reach over and over. And then we land here, a remote property out near Gloucester, a place known as Ken's Hut. And it wasn't random. They already knew he'd been there before. He'd taken things from it, including a firearm. So this wasn't just another place in the bush. It was somewhere he had returned to and somewhere he knew. At this time, the owner had left. The property was sitting empty, and that gave police something they hadn't really had before: control. So they set it up carefully, Sensors inside the hut, around it, quietly watching, not just for movement in the bush, but for the small human things that shouldn't be happening in an empty house. A fridge door opening, food being touched, little signs that out here meant everything, because if no one is supposed to be there, then something like that tells you somebody is. The look on your face. So they put sensors on the fridge door and in a sack of potatoes. So knowing he would likely come there and look for food, and this way they would know. So the owner was he lived in Dungog, and he was letting the police know when he was coming and going from the property. So they were very aware when he wasn't there. So if something moved, they knew that it was him.
Why not just cameras? I'm intrigued by the technology that they've chosen here.
I think he knew they were after them, so they had to be covert. Like there had to be things that he wouldn't notice. Yeah.
Okay.
And while we're sitting here, I think it's important to understand they had been so close so many times. So they didn't want to fuck this up again. So they just put him there.
Okay.
And then they waited.
And is the sensor sending a live?
Yeah, so they know.
Right. They don't have to come and get the sensor to find out. Right, cool.
Yeah, so wherever they're set up, they get the alarm to say the fridge door has been opened, and that's when they know this is our time, we need to go. And on that night, the sensors picked it up. Movement within the hut that the police 100% knew was vacant. And that's the moment where everything shifts again, because this time it's not a sighting, it's not a maybe, it's real.
If it's that one person.
Oh, yeah. And if they get there and it's someone else, but there's not a million people out in these places going and breaking into other people's house just to go into their fridge. Okay. Just after midnight on the 22nd of March 2012, around 20 officers, Tactical Operations Unit, Dog Squad, moved quietly through the bush in the dark surrounding the property, closing in on something that had been just out of their reach for years. And this is the part that's really easy to let turn into something really cinematic, because it's midnight and it's bushland and there's armed police and a fugitive who has been hidden for years. And while I was writing this, I had to keep coming back to that instinct to pull it back, because I didn't want to be part of the thing that I'm actually arguing against.
Yeah.
Because this is where the story can start to grow again into something bigger than it needs to be. What we know is this: they surrounded the hut, they move in, trying not to spook the livestock in the area. The door of the hut opens and a barefoot and muddy Naden appears, and when they call out police, he moves. At first it looks like he's going to run, like this is going to be another one of those moments where he slips away. But then he realises he's surrounded and has nowhere to go. And in that moment, after nearly 7 years on the run, it ends in a way that's almost unexpectedly simple. He surrenders and he says, "Thank God it's over."
That's what he said.
Yeah. He was exhausted. 7 years is a long time.
But man doesn't seem to mind it.
Well, there's going to be a little bit of an argument in here, because they really liked to talk about him as being this expert bushman, and I'll touch on it again later on. He was just a scab. He might have ate some worms. He said he didn't like the taste of them. I think maybe he pulled the head off a tortoise once and ate the meat outside of the tortoise. But mostly he was just ripping off farmhouses. He wasn't an expert bushman. When they found him, he was like, he looked malnourished and frail. He wasn't thriving out there. I mean, 7 years is a long time. I respect that. But I'm not turning him into some hero for evading police for 7 years. So just before we rewind again, I just want to say that this isn't the climax of this story. This is just the moment that Australia gets the ending that it had been waiting for. Let's rewind about 12 months. Somewhere deep into those years on the run, the story shifts. By 2011, Malcolm has been out there for 6 years. And by that point, this isn't just someone hiding anymore. He's learned how to live out there. Police know it too. They've watched the patterns over time, the break and enters across the region, properties being accessed when the owners are away, food taken, supplies used, sometimes weapons. Dozens of properties over the years. Enough that it's no longer random. It's a system. And so the police adapt. They start working with property owners, setting things up deliberately, leaving food, placing items, creating opportunities that might draw him in. Not to trap him immediately, but to understand him, to be able to track his movements and try and get one step ahead. But even then, he keeps getting away. Lots of near misses and close calls, operations that almost land, much to their frustration. And by the time we get to December 2011, near Nolan, there's a level of frustration sitting underneath all of it, because this isn't new anymore. It's 6 years of time, money, resources, and someone who still hasn't been caught. That morning, police move in on a campsite. Not the only one, because by then he'd built multiple shelters out there, but one they believe he'd been using. It's early, around dawn, the kind of light where everything still feels quiet, and they think they've got him. As the officers slowly approach, a shot is fired. A senior constable is hit. The bullet strikes him in the shoulder. And in that moment, for the police, everything changes. Because up until then, this had been a manhunt defined by distance, by searching, tracking, waiting, but now suddenly it's immediate, it's direct, one of their own has been shot. The officer survives and he is taken to hospital and he recovers, but that's almost beside the point in terms of what it does to the search itself. Because from that moment on, the tone shifts. You hear it in the way it's described afterwards. The patience that has been there before starts to fall away. The strategies change. The determination sharpens. Because this isn't just about finding someone who committed crimes years earlier. This is now someone who is armed, who has just fired at police, who has proven in that moment that he is still actively dangerous. And I think that's the point where the story publicly started to change as well. Because once that happened, once the police officer is shot, the focus tightens, the urgency ramps up, and the coverage shifts. The manhunt grows, more resources, more pressure, more attention is poured into it. And it makes sense, of course it does. But at the same time, something else starts to happen. Because as the story becomes about the search, about the risk, and about bringing him in, everything that came before that starts to move further into the background. The peoples whose lives were taken, the harm that set all of this in motion. Those people are still there, but they're not what the story is about anymore. And that's the version that sticks, not the weeks in 2005, not the lives that were lost, but this moment. The shot fired in the bush, an officer going down, the turning point where it becomes something bigger, louder, and more urgent. If you step back from that moment near Nolan before everything sharpens and tightens and turns into that final push to capture him, what you're left with is something much harder to hold on to. It's not one clear narrative. It's not a straight line. It's years that stretch out thin and uneven where nothing quite lands, but nothing ever really settles either. In those early years after 2005, police are already watching for Malcolm Naden, already trying to understand how someone disappears into a landscape like that and stays gone. And at first, it probably feels like something they'll figure out quickly, like most cases do. But slowly, over time, that confidence shifts into something else. Because what starts to emerge isn't a pattern they can pin down, it's the absence of one. Every time they think they're close, every time they start to narrow in a little bit, he's already moved on. It's not by accident. There's something deliberate in the way he's moving through these spaces and in the way he's learning as he goes. The first real sense that something is off doesn't come from a sighting in the bush or some dramatic encounter. It comes from something quieter than that, out at Dubbo Zoo. Staff start noticing small things. Food going missing, cupboards that had been stocked suddenly not quite right, doors that were locked when they left open when they return. The kind of things you can almost explain away if they only happen once. But they didn't just happen once.
He just stayed in the zoo?
He was living in the crawl spaces in the ceilings.
Wow.
So he would climb up into the roof and be up there all day while all of the people were there. And then at night he would come down and take food out of the staff huts, out of the animal enclosures, out of the bins in the picnic areas, because people would bring their picnic lunch, the kids would eat their sandwiches, they'd get thrown in the bin. It was like bushranger sizzler.
Much better than worms.
So much better than worms. But still, it was working until it didn't. Because one day a cleaner walks into the laundry of the staff quarters expecting it to be empty, expecting it just to be another part of her daily routine. And he is there, not running or hiding. He wasn't even startled in the way that you would expect. Just there, like he belonged. And she says, "I'm just looking for a fan." I think that's what it was. "I'm just looking for a fan." And he just turns around and points to it. "It's over there." And she's like, "Okay, thanks." And he hands her a towel because she's the cleaner. And she just leaves the room. And she's like, "Holy shit."
So she knows what his face looks like.
His picture is all over.
Yeah, I know what
every
his
paper.
face looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she knew exactly who it was, but
Yeah.
she was like, if I just play it cool here.
Did they think that he was around that area?
They didn't actually know at this point, so this was one of the first sightings.
Okay.
And they had some theories, but like he was spotted like from Dubbo up to Lightning Ridge. There's all places in between before it really closed in and he started spending a lot of time in the bush in the Barringtons.
So this was 2005?
Yeah, this was not long after, so we're back sort of early in his disappearance.
And when did he start running and disappear?
Just after June. So I'd say it'd still be in June 2005. So obviously she leaves the room, calls the police, and just as quietly as that moment arrived for her, he's gone.
I wonder how that poor lady's doing.
What a close call. Like it would be really scary. What sits with you isn't just that encounter, it's what comes after. Because when police are called in, they start going through the place and it becomes clear he hasn't just passed through. He's been living here in the roof cavity for weeks, above them, around them, close enough to hear them, to watch them, to move through the space without anyone knowing he was there at all. And by the time police swarm the area, by the time everything ramps up and locks down, he is already gone. But the MO becomes the shape of the years to come. Not sightings in the way you'd expect, but traces. The sense that he'd just been there. A door open that shouldn't be. Food gone that was there the day before. Something moved, something out of place. Enough to know, but never enough to catch him. In 2007, out at Stewart's Brook, they find blood. And this time, it's not just a feeling or a suspicion. DNA confirms it's him. So they know without any doubt that he's still out there, still moving through the landscape, still slipping between places. But knowing that and finding him are two completely different things. And by now, the gap is starting to feel like something they can't quite close. Over time, the way he's surviving becomes clearer. He's not the expert bushman people describe him as. He's a scavenger. And then he starts breaking into the properties, cabins, houses, those scattered in places out in the bush that sit empty for long stretches of time. He learns the rhythm of them. He learns when people come and go, when it's safe to go in and when it's not. And once he watches and understands that rhythm, he moves through them almost invisibly. Can you imagine what that would feel like if you lived out there? There's people who talk about like just walking through the house and expecting his face to pop up at the window. And I think because he used to steal bread and he'd cook it over a fire, often because it'd be stale, people talked about smelling toast cooking, and when they smelt the smell of toast, they knew that he was somewhere close by. It would be terrifying if you lived out there. And if we want to talk about terrifying, in 2008, at a remote health retreat in the Barrington Tops, a woman working there starts to feel it before she can explain it. That sense that something isn't right, that she feels like she's being watched. And even though at that point nothing obvious has happened yet, the signs start to appear. He leaves notes, little signs that he's been there, the kinds of details that don't belong there. And slowly that feeling settles into something more certain. She is not alone. He's been there, watching, moving through that same space, watching close enough to see her, to observe her, and write about it in the notes that he's leaving.
Why is he leaving notes?
When we go back to the victims, you'll see that this is part of it. He had a real thing for watching people. Even in his home, there were crawl spaces in the roof. There is some kind of sexual depravity here that I can't even begin to wrap my head around. And the fact that what happens to this woman in 2007 is so close to what happens to Kristy, I think this lady is really lucky to have escaped with her life. And I mean, she was going skinny dipping in the river and all sorts of things because she thought she was up there alone and he was there watching her. This is when it starts to shift for people because it's no longer just about someone surviving out in the bush. It's about someone moving through the edges of people's lives, their homes, their spaces, close enough to touch without always being noticed. Over time, people start calling him the ghost of Barrington Tops. And it makes sense because it's what it feels like to those living it. Here one moment, gone the next, always just out of reach, always somewhere, but never where the police need him to be.
Why do you think that he didn't kill her?
He left a note and I'd say she knew and she called police. So I wonder if it was his
Game?
Yeah, I think it's a bit like a game. And I wonder if he gets off on them feeling frightened of not knowing where the note comes from. But if he was living in the roof of her, the little hut that she was living in, and she made a phone call to police, he'd know that they were coming, so he'd be out of there.
So he was living.
I don't know if he was in the roof of this place, but if he was leaving notes, it wouldn't surprise me if he was. Every house has got one of those, what are those things that go up into the ceiling? Manholes.
Yeah.
Every house has got one.
Wonder how she's doing.
Yeah, I do wonder how she's doing. That's scary. I really feel like when I read her story that was a near miss. Yeah. But again, none of this is where this story begins. It doesn't begin in Barrington Tops. It doesn't begin in those years on the run. It doesn't begin with police searching or helicopters overhead or a name that people recognise. It begins before all of that, before anyone was looking for him at all, where this story is still quiet, still contained, and where the first real harm happens. And that's where we need to go next. We arrive here in 2004 in Dubbo, New South Wales. There's no sense yet of what this will become. No headlines, no urgency, just something that happens inside of a family, inside of a community. A young girl is indecently assaulted. A child. She's 12 years old. Do they suspect Malcolm then? I don't know. But something has shifted in a way that just can't be undone. It stays contained in that moment. It doesn't expand into something bigger, not just yet. And life moves forward. On the 4th of January 2005, 24-year-old Lateesha Nolan is living a life that is still unfolding. Lateesha is a daughter, a mother of 4 adored children, someone who is known and loved, someone who belongs to people, to a family. There are routines, responsibilities, small everyday moments that make up her world. There are people who expect to see Lateesha again. On that day, Lateesha Nolan gives Malcolm a lift to his fishing spot. It's simple, familiar, the kind of thing that doesn't stand out. They're driving out towards Sandy Beach along the Macquarie River. Malcolm Naden is in the back seat. Lateesha is driving.
Does she know him?
Yeah, she knows him. Somewhere along that road, a question is asked. Something that, in any other moment, may pass by without consequence. But it doesn't pass. By the time they reach the river, something inside of Malcolm has shifted into rage. And sitting behind Lateesha, without warning, he reaches forward. The moment is quick and final. There's no chance for Lateesha to understand what is happening. With the life strangled from her body, Naden puts her in the back seat and he keeps driving. As he drives, he looks back at Lateesha and notices the way that she is positioned. He thinks she looks uncomfortable. And he stops the car and he moves her, adjusts her body, as if comfort still matters, as if somehow including this detail in his confession was supposed to show empathy instead of giving insight into how fucked up his mind actually is. He drives further, away from Sandy Beach towards Butler's Falls, and he eventually leaves Lateesha's body there. I'm not going to go into what he did to her body there. The information is out there. If you want to go and search for it yourself, you are most welcome to. But out of respect for Lateesha and her family, I'm just going to leave that bit there. For Lateesha's family at that point, there's no clear story. Lateesha is classified as a missing person. That's how it's understood. That's what the people who love her are left with. Searching, calling, waiting, hoping for something to make sense. Days pass, then weeks. A distraught family is left not knowing. They did find Lateesha's car back at Sandy Beach, but there was no sign of her, so they just had no way. Nobody knew. She had just called past the house and Malcolm was at the front. He says in his confession it was a chance meeting, and if she had come on a few minutes before or a few minutes later, she might still be alive today. And I think that is hard for me to sit with because there was no rhyme or reason. She hadn't done anything to him. She asked a question in the car.
And that's from his confession, all that information?
Yes. So lots of parts of this have come from Dimity's thing, and we will link that in the show notes. So if you do want to watch that, you can.
But we don't know what question it was that made him angry?
Dimity does infer that it may have been in relation to the sexual assault of this young girl.
And was that confirmed?
It was included in his confession, yes. Oh. So I don't know if at the time they knew that Malcolm was involved with that. I don't know exactly what Lateesha's question was. And the confession that Dimity got, there were parts redacted by the court just because of the sheer brutality of the detail that he included within them. I just keep thinking of this family who didn't even have time to fully understand that loss, and then their lives are thrown into turmoil again. When on the 22nd of June, another member of their family is found dead. Kristy Scholes was in a place that should have been safe. Kristy was staying at Malcolm Naden's grandparents' house in Dubbo, house sitting while they were away in Sydney. Malcolm lived there too, but he didn't come out of his room. He came and went from the house through a bedroom window. Kristy was asked to stay because she was trusted. Kristy Scholes is part of that family's world, known, welcomed. She was happy to help. She had her children with her. And the night was ordinary. Kristy puts her children to bed. The house quietens. She settles into that stillness that comes at the end of a day where everything feels contained and safe. But inside that same house, something else had been building, because by that point, Malcolm Naden had already been watching her. There had been notes, handwritten messages left for her, enough that it made people uneasy, even if they didn't fully understand why. And when police later examine the house, they find something else. Crawl spaces in the ceiling, small openings, peepholes looking down into the rooms below. Spaces where someone could watch without being seen. That night, in that quiet house, Malcolm Naden moves towards Kristy. There's no warning, no chance for her to react. He strangles her inside that home, inside a space that should have been safe. Afterwards, Kristy Scholes is dragged into his bedroom, a room that sits apart from the rest of the house because no one enters that room. The door is always locked. Malcolm rapes her body and then props her up on the bed, locking the door while her 2 children sleep in a room just down the hall, and then he runs like a coward dog. The next morning, something feels wrong. Family members return. The children are there, but Kristy is nowhere to be seen. And that absence is immediate to them. It's not something that can be explained away. It sits heavily in the space almost straight away. She would never leave her babies alone. They begin searching, calling her name, looking through the house. Malcolm's bedroom door is locked. And in the back of their minds, there is something else because it hasn't been long since Lateesha went missing. Police are called, and when the officers arrive and search the house, they find Kristy in Malcolm's bedroom, and he is gone. And that's the moment that everything shifts to the wrong story. 2 lives taken in the space of months. Families left trying to understand something that will never make sense. 6 children who are growing up without their mothers. So fuck you, Malcolm. This is not your story, and it never was. I want you all to remember Lateesha Nolan, Kristy Scholes, and all of the lives that continue on without them.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If These Trees Could Talk and What Would They Say are productions of Bellevue Studio. Our host is Shannon Walters, executive and audio production by Megan Anderson, with socials and marketing managed by Mia Oberdorf. We always appreciate hearing your thoughts, so if you would like to support the show, you can rate, review and subscribe. To stay up to date between episodes, you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. For more information on this episode or to connect with our guests, you'll find everything you need to know in the show notes at ifthesetreescouldtalk.com.au. We're grateful to have you with us, and we look forward to sharing what comes next. Thanks for being here.